Mistakes that keep coming back again and again aren't just bad luck. They're warning signs of a deeper pattern that traps many people without them even knowing it. That feeling when you swear you've learned your lesson, only to find yourself making the exact same error months later. It's frustrating, confusing, and sometimes even heartbreaking. In this video, I'm going to reveal 5 clear signs that you might be caught in this cycle of repeating mistakes. These aren't obvious signs that everyone talks about. These are the hidden patterns that most people miss until it's too late. By the end of this video, you'll be able to spot these warning signals in your own life and break free from this curse once and for all. And trust me, you'll want to watch this entire video carefully. Every section builds on the last one. If you're short on time, just watch at 1.5 or 2 times speed instead of skipping around, because missing even one of these signs could keep you stuck in that frustrating loop of mistakes. Let's dive right in. Have you ever found yourself saying, "I can't believe I did it again"? It's like your brain has a glitch, a weird loop that keeps playing the same mistake movie over and over. And the worst part? You usually don't see it coming until it's too late. That's because we all have these sneaky little things called emotional blind spots. They're like those hidden spots when you're driving. You check your mirrors, you look around, but somehow there's always that one angle you just can't see. Let me share something funny that happens to me all the time. I'll be having a perfectly normal day when someone makes a tiny comment about my work. Suddenly, I'm a different person, defensive, snippy, making choices I later regret. It took me years to realize this wasn't random. It was my first emotional blind spot in action. Now here's the thing about these blind spots. They're not just random moments of bad judgment. They're specific emotional triggers that set off a chain reaction in your brain. Think of them as emotional landmines buried in your everyday life. Step on one, and boom, rational thinking goes right out the window. The first sign you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes is having these unidentified emotional blind spots controlling your decisions behind the scenes. What makes these blind spots so dangerous is that they hijack your brain's normal thinking process. Scientists call this emotional hijacking, when your emotional brain grabs the wheel from your rational brain. It happens in milliseconds, before your thinking brain even knows what's going on. Common blind spots include fear of rejection, which makes you agree to things you don't want to do, need for approval, which stops you from speaking up, fear of conflict, which keeps you in bad situations too long, and insecurity, which makes you sabotage your own success. Sound familiar? Most people have at least 1 or 2 of these running their lives without even knowing it. Here's a super simple way to catch these blind spots in action. Next time you make a mistake you've made before, grab a piece of paper and write down every emotion you felt right before the mistake happened. Were you angry, scared, or even feeling unappreciated? Do this a few times and you'll start seeing patterns, the same emotions showing up before the same mistakes. The crazy thing is, once you spot your emotional blind spots, they lose most of their power over you. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. The scary shadows disappear when you can actually see what's there. So how do you actually break free from these emotional traps? First, you need to name them. Literally give your emotional blind spots names. Call them out when they show up. Oh, there's my rejection fear trying to make me say yes again. This creates distance between you and the emotion. Second, create a 5-second pause rule. When you feel strong emotions bubbling up, count to 5 before saying or doing anything. This tiny pause gives your thinking brain time to catch up with your emotional brain. And third, develop an emotional pre-check habit before important decisions. Ask yourself, am I in a good emotional state to make this choice right now? If not, try to delay the decision until the emotional storm passes. Your emotional blind spots have probably been running the show for years. But starting today, you get to take back control, because awareness is the first step to breaking this curse of repeated mistakes. Now, we've all been there, promising ourselves never again after a painful mistake, only to find ourselves making the exact same error months later. It feels like banging your head against the same wall over and over. Why does this happen despite our best intentions? I remember talking with a friend who kept dating the same type of unavailable partners. After each heartbreak, she'd say, "I've finally learned my lesson." Yet 3 months later, there she was. Same situation, different person. The pain in her eyes was real, and maybe you felt that same frustration with yourself. This brings us to the second sign you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes: false learning. False learning is this sneaky mental trap where we convince ourselves we've learned from an experience when we've only scratched the surface. It's like treating a splinter when you actually have an infection. You might feel better temporarily, but the real problem continues growing beneath the surface. Here's what makes false learning so tricky. It feels exactly like real learning. You have that aha moment. You make those sincere promises to yourself. You truly believe things will be different this time, but then they aren't. So what's really happening here? When we experience a painful mistake, our brains are hardwired to find meaning quickly so we can move past the discomfort. We grab the first lesson that makes sense and run with it, often missing the deeper patterns that caused the mistake in the first place. Let me give you an example. Say you keep overspending and getting into debt. After each financial crisis, you might think, "I need to be more careful with money." That sounds reasonable, right? But this surface-level understanding doesn't address the root causes. Maybe you're using shopping to cope with stress, or perhaps you never learned proper budgeting skills, or you might be trying to keep up with friends who have different financial situations. This happens in our careers too. Maybe you keep having conflicts with bosses. After each job change, you think, "I just need to find a better manager." But what if the real pattern is that you struggle with receiving feedback or have trouble communicating your needs clearly? The difference between surface learning and deep learning is like the difference between memorizing a math formula and actually understanding how to apply it. One helps you pass a single test. The other transforms how you solve problems for life. So how can you tell if you've really learned or just convinced yourself you have? Here's a simple test. Can you articulate precisely what went wrong, why it happened, and exactly what specific behaviors you need to change? If your answer is vague, like, "I'll try harder," or "I'll be more careful," that's a warning sign of false learning. True learning changes your behavior automatically, not through constant willpower. When you've really learned, the new way feels natural, not like a constant struggle against your instincts. To break through false learning, start by asking better questions. Instead of, "What went wrong?" ask, "What pattern keeps repeating across different situations in my life?" Instead of, "How do I fix this?" ask, "What am I avoiding seeing about myself right now?" The hardest truth is that real learning is often uncomfortable. It might mean facing parts of yourself you've been avoiding or admitting that a problem is more complex than you wanted it to be. By the way, if you're finding value in these insights and want to support this channel, you can click the thanks button below this video. Your support helps us create more content that transforms lives and breaks these cycles of repeated mistakes. Now, let's continue with the third sign that you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes. Did you know that your environment is secretly programming your behavior every single day? This isn't some sci-fi concept. It's actually how our brains are wired to work. And it might be the most overlooked reason why you keep making the same mistakes over and over again. The third sign you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes is that you're caught in environmental traps, powerful situational forces that practically guarantee you'll fall into the same patterns, no matter how determined you are to change. Think about this mind-blowing fact. According to research in behavioral psychology, up to 90% of our daily actions aren't conscious choices at all. They're automatic responses triggered by our environment. That means the spaces, people, and situations around you are literally setting you up for success or failure before you even realize what's happening. Let me paint a picture of how this works. Imagine you're trying to break a habit of checking your phone first thing in the morning because it makes you anxious and starts your day off poorly. You make a firm decision the night before. Tomorrow I won't check my phone until after breakfast. Great plan. But then morning comes, and what's sitting right next to your bed? Your phone, which you use as an alarm. Your hand reaches for it automatically, and before your conscious mind can even wake up fully, you're scrolling through notifications and feeling that familiar anxiety creep in. The environment won this round before your willpower even had a chance to show up for the fight. These environmental forces work in much bigger ways too. Let's say you've decided to stop gossiping at work because it's caused problems for you. Amazing decision. But then you find yourself in the break room with the same colleagues who always gossip, and suddenly you're contributing to the conversation without even planning to. Your physical location and social circle created a situation where your old behavior was almost inevitable. What's happening is something psychologists call choice architecture, the invisible ways your environment is structured to make certain choices easier and others harder. It's like walking into a grocery store and finding all the sugary snacks at eye level and checkout lanes, while healthier options require more searching. The store has architected your choices to make some options almost automatic. Your personal environments are doing the exact same thing to you right now. The shocking truth: willpower is actually a terrible strategy for breaking cycles of repeated mistakes. Relying on willpower alone is like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. You might make progress for a while through sheer effort, but eventually the environmental current will win. So what's the solution? Instead of fighting the current, change the river's flow. Strategic environmental design is far more powerful than willpower could ever be. Start by conducting what I call an environmental audit. Identify which specific environments consistently trigger your unwanted behaviors. Is it certain physical locations, particular people, specific times of day, digital spaces like social media apps? Once you've pinpointed these trigger environments, you can redesign them to support your goals instead of sabotaging them. For the phone example, the solution might be buying an actual alarm clock and charging your phone overnight in another room. For the workplace gossip, it could mean taking your breaks at a different time or location, or bringing specific topics to discuss that shift conversations in a more positive direction. The most powerful part of environmental design is that it works while you're on autopilot, which is how we operate most of the time. When you remove the environmental triggers, you don't have to constantly battle against your habits. The right behavior becomes the path of least resistance. Remember, your environment will shape your behavior with or without your permission. The question is whether you'll let it happen randomly or whether you'll take control and design it intentionally. This might be the most underutilized strategy for breaking the curse of repeated mistakes, but it's often the most effective one. Now, there's this particular phrase you should be very careful of saying, and that is the phrase, "That's just who I am." Every time you say, "That's just who I am," you might be locking yourself in an invisible cage. This seemingly innocent phrase reveals something profound about why we keep making the same mistakes, despite clearly seeing their consequences. And it points directly to the fourth sign you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes: identity attachment. Identity attachment runs deeper than habits or patterns. It's about who you believe you are at your core. And once something becomes part of your identity, your brain will work overtime to protect and preserve that self-image, even when it hurts you. Think about how many times you've heard someone say, or said yourself, phrases like, "I'm just not a morning person. I've always been bad with money. I'm the type who leaves things to the last minute. I'm not good at relationships." These aren't just casual observations. They're identity statements that your brain treats as fundamental truths that must be defended. The science behind this is fascinating and sobering. Your brain experiences threats to your identity in the same regions that process physical pain. This means challenging a core belief about yourself can feel as threatening as actual physical danger. Your brain will literally fight to maintain consistency with your self-image, even if that means sabotaging positive changes you're trying to make. This is why someone who deeply identifies as not athletic might suddenly find excuses to quit a new exercise routine that's actually working well. It's why someone who sees themselves as always struggling financially might unconsciously spend a windfall quickly rather than save it. The new behaviors create what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a mental conflict between your actions and your self-image, and your brain will work tirelessly to resolve that discomfort by returning to behaviors that match your identity. The most dangerous identity attachments often hide in plain sight, disguised as simple facts about yourself rather than changeable beliefs. They frequently contain words like always, never, just, and type of person, linguistic clues that you've moved from describing behaviors to defining identity. Here's how to recognize when your self-narrative is sabotaging your progress. Pay attention when you feel unusually strong resistance to changing a particular behavior. That discomfort often signals you've bumped against an identity belief. Notice when you find yourself explaining away repeated mistakes with phrases like, "That's just me," and watch for patterns where initial success in changing a behavior is followed by self-sabotage or abandonment of your progress. The good news is that identities aren't fixed. They're constructed through stories we tell ourselves, and those stories can be rewritten. Neuroplasticity research shows that our brains physically reorganize throughout our lives based on our experiences and beliefs. You can literally rewire your neural pathways to support a new self-image. The key is creating identity flexibility rather than trying to swap one rigid identity for another. Start by shifting from absolute statements like "I am" to contextual ones like "sometimes I." Instead of "I'm disorganized," try "I've often struggled with organization in the past, but I'm developing new systems." This creates mental space for new behaviors without triggering identity defense mechanisms. Another powerful technique is identity experimentation. Rather than making permanent identity changes that feel threatening, try borrowing a new identity temporarily. Tell yourself, "For the next 2 weeks, I'm going to experiment with being the kind of person who exercises daily." This bypasses resistance because it's framed as an experiment rather than a threat to who you are. Perhaps most important is consciously expanding your identity to include growth itself. When being a person who grows and evolves becomes part of your core identity, change becomes congruent with your self-image instead of threatening it. Breaking free from the prison of rigid self-definition might be the most profound transformation you can make. Because when you're no longer bound by who you think you are, you're free to become who you might be. Now, have you ever wondered why some people seem to learn and improve naturally while others keep circling the same problems for years? The difference often isn't intelligence or willpower, it's having effective feedback systems. And the fifth sign you're cursed to repeat the same mistakes is missing these crucial feedback loops in your life. Take a moment to reflect on your most persistent problems, the struggles that keep coming back no matter how many times you've tried to solve them. Now ask yourself, how do I know if I'm actually making progress on these issues? What specific information am I collecting to measure improvement? If you're like most people, the answer might be nothing concrete at all. Without clear feedback loops, we're essentially driving blindfolded, only noticing we've gone off track when we crash. Our brains are remarkably good at filtering information to match our existing beliefs, which means without intentional feedback systems, we'll naturally ignore evidence that we're repeating old patterns until it's too late. Think about a time when a problem in your life seemed to come out of nowhere. Maybe a relationship suddenly ended, you got feedback at work that shocked you, or a health issue appeared without warning. Looking back, Could you see that there were actually dozens of small signals you missed along the way? Those missed signals represent broken feedback loops. Most of us rely on what researchers call lagging indicators, evidence that shows up only after a pattern has fully played out. We notice we've repeated a mistake after it's done, when the consequences are already happening. The key to breaking cycles of repeated mistakes is shifting to leading indicators, early warning signs that detect patterns before they fully manifest. For example, instead of only recognizing relationship problems when conflict becomes intense, a lagging indicator, you might track how many times per week you have meaningful conversations without distractions, a leading indicator. Instead of only noticing financial problems when you're out of money, lagging, you might monitor your spending impulses daily, leading. Here's where most people go wrong with feedback. They either avoid it entirely because it feels uncomfortable, or they seek vague, biased feedback that doesn't actually help them change. We all know someone who asks, "How am I doing?" but really just wants reassurance rather than truth. Creating effective feedback loops requires both courage and strategy. First, you need to identify specific behaviors you want to track. The more concrete, the better. For instance, if you're working on being more assertive, you might count how many times you express your needs clearly each day, rather than just vaguely wondering if you're being more assertive. Next, establish regular check-in times to review this data. Without scheduled reflection, even the best feedback gets lost in daily life. This might mean a weekly review of your key metrics or a monthly conversation with a trusted friend about your progress. The most powerful feedback often comes from outside sources who can see our blind spots. But here's the critical part many miss. You need to teach people how to give you useful feedback. Vague comments like, "You're doing great," or "You need to try harder," aren't actionable. Instead, ask for specific observations. "What's one time this week you noticed me falling into my old pattern?" Or, "What's one specific thing I could do differently next time?" Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of feedback is creating emotional safety around it. Our brains naturally defend against information that feels threatening. Try creating a simple ritual before receiving feedback. Take 3 deep breaths and remind yourself that feedback is information for growth, not a judgment of your worth. Let me share a simple daily practice that can transform your relationship with feedback. Each evening, ask yourself 3 questions. What went well today? What mistake did I catch myself almost making? What adjustment will I make tomorrow? This simple loop trains your brain to spot patterns earlier each time. The truth is, missing feedback loops create a kind of developmental blindness. Without them, we can spend years or even decades genuinely believing we're making progress when we're actually walking in circles. But with intentional feedback systems, even the most persistent patterns can be broken. Take a moment to reflect. What's one area of your life where clearer feedback could help break a cycle of repeated mistakes? How might you begin measuring progress in that area starting today? We've uncovered the 5 signs that might have been cursing you to repeat the same mistakes. Emotional blind spots that hijack your decisions. False learning that creates the illusion of growth. Environmental traps that set you up to fail. Identity attachments that keep you locked in old patterns. And missing feedback loops that leave you navigating without a map. These 5 elements don't work in isolation. They form an interconnected system that keeps you stuck in cycles of repeated mistakes. Your emotional blind spots lead to false learning, which gets reinforced by your environment, protected by your identity, and perpetuated by lack of feedback. The good news? Awareness is the master key that begins unlocking this entire system. Now that you can recognize these patterns, you've already taken the first crucial step toward breaking free from them. I've seen people transform their lives by applying these insights, like my colleague who broke a 15-year cycle of toxic relationships once she addressed her emotional blind spots and identity attachments. Within months, her entire life looked different. The choice is now yours. You can close this video and continue as before, letting these invisible forces dictate your future. Or you can use what you've learned to begin writing a new story, one where you're no longer cursed to repeat the same painful lessons. If this video has opened your eyes, don't let the algorithm miss. Click on the suggested video appearing on your screen right now. It's specifically selected to build on what you've just learned and take your personal growth to the next level. Your future self will thank you for continuing this journey of transformation.